And we're live on the Stables Network.
Welcome to ATL Prime Sports, coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. Our special opening day edition of Major League Baseball. We have Warren Brewster, 1980 Philadelphia Phillies World Series champion, will take us all back in time today as we relive the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies baseball season. A tremendous season it was. And Warren Brewster, welcome to the show, sir, and thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Todd. It's a pleasure. I enjoy talking about the old days and about the 1980 Phillies. It's now 40 years ago since we won the World Series, or it'll be 40 years this October. Quite a season it was. It was started off very tough. We struggled through the season and finally got to the finish line where we belonged a few years prior to that, but we just couldn't get over the hump beating the Dodgers in the playoffs. We finally had a playoff victory, and on to the World Series we went.
Well, that 1980 season, you were in a big pennant race with the Montreal Expos. You ended up winning the game by just one game. You ended up with a 1-71 record, and the Expos were 90-72. Tell us what it was like to be in such an exciting pennant race during that time.
Well, we really struggled. We struggled the whole season. We had a lot of injuries, and it took a while for us to get back healthy and really start rolling. We struggled through July and into August, and then about the middle of August, we finally put it all together. We finally got into the race in about the middle of August, and I believe we went like 35-7 down the stretch. I mean, that's what it took. We had to win every day. The pressure was on from the middle of August on to the end of the season. So it was something that we hadn't experienced as a group before. Well, 78 was a tight race, but the other races prior to that we had big, huge leads. So coming down the stretch, we finally took over first place in San Diego in a doubleheader that we swept out on a Saturday night, and then the next day we won again. But we had a problem with the outfielders catching fly balls, and there were some things said, and it started to get a little edgy in the clubhouse. And the owner, Willie Carpenter, and Paul Owens both flew to San Francisco and met us the next day, and we had a closed-door team meeting prior to batting practice, and they really let us have it. They said, you guys have been struggling the whole year, and some guys come to play some days and don't others, and then now it's time to bear down, and let's finish out the month and get things going. And from that time on, we really seemed to roll. And Dallas Green, the manager, really managed with an iron fist. He was very tough on guys, and that's what we needed. We needed a little kick in the rear end every once in a while to keep everything going. It's something that when you're playing every day, there's times the everyday players have a tendency occasionally to get a little bit lax, and so they came in and really read the riot act, and then I think it kicked in with everybody, and we everybody put their best foot forward, and we went on to get really on a roll through September, and it carried on into the playoffs and into the World Series. One of the things I remember vividly was going to Montreal. Well, even prior to that, we played the Chicago Cubs. We had a 3-run deficit in about the 15th inning, and they made a couple of errors, and crazy things happened. We ended up winning that game to go to Montreal. We left that night after the game going to Montreal in a flat-footed tie. And so 3-game series, 2 out of 3 wins the division and goes to the playoffs. So that Friday night, we were taking batting practice, and the Montreal fans were kind of getting on Lonnie Smith in the outfield during batting practice. And Sparky Lyle, being crazy Sparky, pulled his pants down and mooned the crowd. So we came in, and it was like everybody came in the clubhouse laughing, and just it really took a lot of tension and a lot of pressure off everything. We just went out and had fun and won the next 2 games, and then eventually went to the playoffs, and then had unbelievable series against Houston. 5-game series. Back in those days, it was a 5-game NLCS, and we won 3 out of the 5, and 4 of those 5 games went extra innings. And so there was quite a lot of excitement, and every pitch meant something, and it was an exciting time and a lot of fun. It's great memories to have of that. And then finally got to the World Series, and our opening night starter in Game 1 of the World Series was Bob Walk, the first one since 1952, first rookie to start a World Series game, the first game of a World Series since 1952. So that was exciting. Got behind early, came back and won that game. Then won Game 2, then went to Kansas City, lost Game 3. Got beat bad in Game 4. It was a day where it's like we didn't show up to play. And in Game 5, we were down in the 9th inning, and Del Unser, Manny Trio made a great relay throw to throw somebody out at the plate. And then Del Unser came up with a big pinch hit in the top of the 9th to put us ahead down in the right field corner. And it was crazy things like that. It was like somebody came up big every night. It was somebody different. It wasn't just the same people night in, night out. Mike Schmidt, of course, had an MVP year that year. But around, there were different guys contributing, and it took all 25 guys. In fact, more than that, because we had some injuries, like I said before. And there were guys, it took about 30 people to finally win that thing.
Well, the 1980 NLCS between you guys and the Astros, like you said, 4 out of 5 games needed extra innings. There was only 1 home run hit, and it was a game-winning 2-run homer by Greg Lazinski in Game 1 in Philadelphia. Can you talk about that game a little bit in particular, because that seemed to set the tone for the rest of the series?
Right. That was a huge home run in one Game 1. And knowing our offense, we were a very offensive team. That was the big part of the 70s and 80s Phillies. We were a very offensive ball club, but we would go to Houston and play a 3-game series, and we'd be lucky to score 5 runs. It was a big ballpark, not conducive for us to hit a lot of home runs. You had to be a gap-to-gap guy in that ballpark. They built their club around that. They had a lot of gap-to-gap hitters and not a lot of home run hitters. And we pretty much lived by the home run, the kind of the Earl Weaver 3-run home run offense. And so we knew, and plus Houston had outstanding pitching, with Nolan Ryan, Joe Niekro. They were tough to contend with because of their pitching staff, and they would hold us down pretty good. So we went to the Astrodome. We lost Game 2 in extra innings, and then we went to the Astrodome 1-1 in a ballpark where we didn't play too well in. But we were fortunate enough to we lost Game 3 1-0, and then came back in Game 4, won that, and then went on to Game 5 that Marty Bystrom pitched against Nolan Ryan. And that game went extra innings. We won it in, I believe, the 11th inning. And Gary Maddox caught the final out in center field, and it was a mad dash to center field. And we finally got through and finally broke through and won a playoff series.
Well, you mentioned that it was the most extra innings games of any postseason. That still is a record in Major League history. It was also the first postseason win, Game 1, home win for the Phillies since the 1915 World Series. So, you guys made a lot of history in that series. Your MVP was Manny Trillo, and it seemed like guys were coming, we're stepping up different guys every night, especially against that phenomenal Houston pitching staff. You were down in Game 5 in Houston, down 5-2 in the top of the 8th. You ended up tying it. You ended up going in extra innings. What was the mood of the club in that game during that Game 5 when you were down 5-2 going in the top of the 8th?
Well, that's when Pete stepped up. Pete said, "Come on, let's go. I get on base. We're going to win this thing." He leads off the inning with a walk. So,
Pete Rose.
Everybody just everybody kind of just followed suit. It was a crazy inning. Things in that series were crazy the entire series. The ball was hit back, I believe, in Game 4. A ball was hit back to Joe Negro, or no, it was to Vern Rule, and they couldn't tell if he caught it or if he trapped it, and they didn't know what to call. And we had the bases loaded at the time, and they called it a double play where it should have been. It was either no outs and a run scores, or it's a triple play, because there were base runners running all over the field. Nobody knew what to do because the umpires didn't make the call, and they didn't know what happened. They couldn't figure it out. They stopped the game for about 10 minutes.
And they played the game under protest, correct? They played that,
right,
each club played the game under protest.
Right, and Chubb Feeney was there. They went over and met with him. They didn't know what to do because it was such a crazy play, and they didn't use replay in those days. And to this day, I still don't know if he caught the. He still can't tell if he caught the ball or trapped the ball. It was a crazy play, and so there was all sorts of tension and stuff like that. So that he never knew what was going to happen next. It was the craziest series probably ever played. It was really a lot of excitement, and a lot of fun.
Well, it's appropriate then when the game-winning double by Gary Maddox in the top of the inning, top of the 10th, for you guys to win it in Game 5. It was almost poetic.
Right. Yeah, it was the right man caught the final out in that series. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, like you said before, a different guy stepped up in every situation. It was not just a few guys. It took everybody. Everybody contributed and was a part of that winning playoff series.
And the Phillies club made more history in that series. You won your first pennant since 1950. So,
right.
just an incredible time for the city of Philadelphia. Talk about how exciting that was for the city of Philadelphia to get to the World Series.
Right. Because we'd gotten so close so many times before, and now we finally got over the hump and got to the World Series, and it was a real exciting time in Philadelphia. I mean, what a great baseball sports town Philadelphia is. They take a lot of abuse for booing Santa Claus and crazy things like that, but Philadelphia is an outstanding sports town. They know their sports, and if you don't give 100%, they let you know about it, as they should. I mean, you want to win, and the only way you're going to win is giving 100%. There's no other ways about it. You've got to get the work done and put the work in, and to reap the rewards of winning it. And that was one thing we did. We worked hard as a team, day in, day out, getting better and finally putting everything together. And so finally, it all worked out for us, and it was a great time. And then the parade we had after we won the World Series was one of the greatest times that Philadelphia was out. And they estimated there were over 1 million people at the parade.
And that's back in 1980. You're listening to Warren Brewster here on ATL Prime Sports, Major League Baseball Special Edition opening day. Warren was a relief pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies during their World Championship season. And Warren, you were a big part of this NLCS. In Game 4, you did get the win. You ended up pitching.
Right.
I know there was the blown save. But you kept the Astros at bay. You only gave up one hit and one run. It was earned, and you gave up a walk. So Game 4 was pivotal. You ended up getting the win. Right.
And that was I've looked at it over and over again. I walked the leadoff hitter, which you just absolutely cannot do. They bunted him over. So he's on second, and Terry Poole's coming up, and I'm standing on the mound going, I've never got this guy out. Now what? And sure enough, he hits a line drive, base hit into center, probably left center field. And they tied the game up, and that's the loudest noise I've ever heard in my life. The Astrodome was absolutely vibrating. It was unbelievable, the noise. So now Poole's on first base, and Enos Cabell comes up. And for whatever reason, they try to hit and run. and I threw a fastball in, and I jammed Cabell, and he hit a nice little lazy fly ball out to Bake McBride in right field. So I'm coming down off the mound, and Poole's now rounded second halfway to shortstop. He cuts across the diamond and starts running back to first, and I'm standing there watching him run by me. I'm going, what is he doing? So I ran it over and got behind Pete and just said, I got to just make sure this ball doesn't get the dugout. If this ball doesn't get in the dugout, the inning's over, because number one, they threw him out at first base anyway, but he didn't retouch second base on the way back to first. He just cut across the diamond. So I knew, the inning was over. Had the ball not gone in the dugout, sure enough, Pete caught it, tagged first, and it was a double play. And then we were fortunate enough to score a run in the top of the 10th, and then Tug came in and shut him down in the bottom of the 10th. So I ended up getting a win, which is as a reliever, you want to save, not to win. That's the only way you're going to get a win in that situation is if you blow a save or have trouble in that inning.
Well, in Game 5, you're also an instrumental part of the victory. You pitched 2/3 an inning, a perfect outing. You came in for the starter there in the 5th inning, Marty Bystrom. So tell us about that. That helped your ball club stay in it. Right.
Yeah. That was. I came in at the end of the inning, and Marty had come up in September. And Dallas really pulled a fast one on baseball because we had two pitchers, Nino Espinosa and Randy Lurch, who were both on the roster at the time. Well, Nino was hurt, so they took Nino off, or they traded. Kevin Saucier was on the disabled list at the time, so they moved Randy Lurch off the roster, put Kevin Saucier on the roster, and then they said, well, Nino's hurt also. So he petitioned to the office to see if they could get Bystrom on the roster in place of Nino Espinosa, and they let him do it. And because you had to be in the big leagues or on the roster as of August 31st, and Marty didn't come up until after September 1st. And he pitched in the month of September, went 5-0, and was just phenomenal down the stretch. Started Game 5 in the playoffs against Nolan Ryan, and the Game 5 in the World Series against Kansas City. So he was a big part of us winning and getting to getting to the playoffs, and then winning the playoffs and getting to the World Series. And then I followed him in Game 5, got 2 outs, got out of that inning, and then it was a crazy game. And then Nolan Ryan had a 5-2 lead going into the 7th inning, and lifetime, I think he was 105-2, something ridiculous, taking a 3-run lead into that late in the ball game. And so it took something phenomenal for us to win the playoffs and get to the World Series. And it was crazy things, and this is stuff you never think about while you're playing. You're just playing the game. And then you read all this and hear all this stuff. Oh boy, we didn't have a chance. And it's amazing all the things that are created when things like that happen and situations happen like that.
Well, you were the underdog against the Astros, and then you go into the World Series, the ALCS, Kansas City was the underdog against the Yankees. You ended up winning, and Kansas City ended up defeating the Yankees. They were led by George Brett and ALCS MVP Frank White. So this was another phenomenal test for your baseball club. I know the team was led for some timely hitting there by Mike Schmidt, who had 48 homers and 121 RBIs, ended up becoming the NL MVP and the World Series MVP. And then you were also led by Pete Rose, who, his leadership, is phenomenal, not only on the field and off the field. But, Mike just had one heck of a series. He had the series clinching hit in Game 6. It was also the most watched Game 6 was in the World Series. And Steve Carlton, he won the Cy Young that year, had 24 wins and 286 strikeouts. That was his 3rd NL Cy Young. You became the last of the 16 teams that made up the major leagues from 1901 to 1961 to win the World Series. And, you're up
right.
2-0. You know, it was incredible. You're up 2-0, then you tied it at 2-2. Just tell us about the series in general, the up and downs, the play of Schmidt and Rose and Carlton to make this phenomenal feat to beat an excellent Kansas City team.
Right. You know, they were in the same boat as us. They'd lost in the playoffs prior, and they finally got over the hump to get to the World Series. Yeah, so it was a battle of two teams that had tough times getting that far. And we won the first two games. We came back in the first game to win that one, and then we won the second one, and we go to Kansas City. Tight game, that Friday night game. I believe it was like 1-1 in about the seventh, and they scored a couple runs or scratched across the run and beat us in that game. And then the Saturday game, Larry Christensen went out and pitched, and he was having elbow problems at the time. And I don't believe he got through the second inning. He got hit pretty hard and got us in a hole that we just couldn't get out of. So now they tied it 2-2. Now the momentum's starting to shift. And we're behind in Game 5. And again, like I said before, Del Unser came up in the top of the ninth, got a big hit down in the corner to put us ahead. We held them off in that game. They had the bases loaded when Tug struck out Jose Cardinal to end it. So we're holding our breath the whole time there. And now we got a 3-2 lead. Get back on plane, go back to Philadelphia, and we got left going on Tuesday night. So we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. And that went on to that be the game clinching or series clinching game. But you got to feel pretty good when Steve Coughlin's on the mound. Anytime lefty is on the mound, it's always win day for us.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. You know, you faced George Brett, who ended up hitting .390 that season. He was a threat to hit .400. It really came down to the last week. Did you guys, while you were in the pennant race, did you take a little bit and look what was going on in the AL, thinking maybe we'll face the Royals if we get to the World Series, and think about what George Brett was doing for Kansas City?
Well, no, at the time you're concentrating on what you're doing, and then, you know, in those days there was no interleague play, so you weren't real familiar with the American League teams. You know, you followed Brett because it was on national news every day of getting close to hit 400, and you knew who their players were. We'd see them every once in a while. In fact, we play them every spring, but that's the only time you would see them. And so you don't know much about them. And for me, I just go about doing what I do. So I watched where the hitters swing, and I pitched accordingly. Like when I came into the game, Game 4, I had runners on, and Hal McRae was the first hitter I faced, and I threw him a fastball in, jammed him, hit a ground ball to shortstop, got him out, got out of the inning. And then later, the next inning, Darrell Porter came up, and he had a real dead low ball swing. I could tell as I walked him. I faced 8 hitters. I retired 7 of the 8. And I pitched around Porter because I said, if I throw him anything close, he's going to hit it 9 miles. I could just tell by the way he was swinging the bat what kind of hitter he was. And then eventually the next year, he got traded in St. Louis. I faced him later in my career. I threw him all over the plate, and he hit it out. You know, and I could tell by the way he swung, he was a guy I didn't want to face. I would pitch around a guy like that.
So they didn't have the scouting reports back then like they did today. They don't have the in-depth, so you kind of had to watch from the dugout a lot more closely than you would, you know, in today's game, because players are preparing and they're not watching the game because they're paying attention to the scouting reports, where back then you really had to pay attention to the game.
Right. And you would, when I first got called up to the big leagues, the pitching coach told me that we got scouting reports on all the teams. You know, it'd be a good idea to go through them and get familiar with the hitters and stuff. So I start going through the scouting reports, and they all said the same thing: pitch them up and in and down and away, up and in, down and away. So that, you know, you go, well, you know, and I was a sinker slider pitcher. I pitched on the inside corner to a right-hander and away from a right-hander with my slider. So I only had 2 locations that I threw to. So I figured that out in a hurry, who could handle what. I could tell by their swings generally what people could handle, where they stood in relation to on the plate, off the plate, wherever they stood. And then a lot of it, I could rely on Bob Boone, who was the catcher the majority of the time, my rookie and second year, to know what the hitters. I can remember vividly one night in Pittsburgh, Bill Robinson was hitting. I had 2 strikes on him, and Booney comes running to the mound and says, "I played with Bill, bounce a slider right on top of home plate, and you got him." Okay. He went back behind the plate. I bounced the slider on home plate and swung and missed. So the little things like that, little idiosyncrasies that Bob Boone knew, so he could guide me along with what I threw. And then I put, 99% of my faith in him. Whatever he put down, I threw. I'm not going to. He's a veteran catcher. He knows the hitters way better than I do. So as I get to learn the hitters and how my stuff works, I just let him guide me through. And as I got experience, then I started doing different things with certain hitters because I know that worked for me.
Speaking of Bob Boone, what a baseball family he has. I mean, we can go to today. Brett Boone. I mean, he's the manager of the Yankees. I mean, you could go on and on talking about the Boone family. What was it like? What was it like for Bob to be your catcher? Because a catcher is a lot of times they're a leader of the club. How much help was Bob to your career?
Oh, he was a big help. He would explain things to me. What you need to do in this situation, that situation. How to pitch people with the stuff that I had, and he and I worked together with what I had to get people out. And he was a great influence. It was outstanding to have a veteran catcher, coming up. It's tough enough to play in the big leagues, and now I have somebody to help guide me through it. It made it a lot easier to make that transition from the minor leagues to the big leagues with a guy like that I could really depend on.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's talk about some other characters on the team you were with on the show last Friday. Let's talk about Steve Carlton and his relationship with the media.
Yeah. By the time I got to Philadelphia, Steve Carlton wasn't talking to the media. And then every once in a while, somebody would come into the clubhouse and not be aware. I have no idea who these people could be writing for. And they'd stand around and wait by his locker. And they'd stand there for a half hour waiting for him. And he'd finally show up and he'd go, "I don't talk to the media." And they'd walk away. I mean, it was hilarious. He was another great influence. He had little things here and there. I can remember being one day in Chicago. We had a left-handed reliever on an 80 team named Kevin Sauché. And Sauce asked him, he said, "Lefty, how do you throw your slider? Here's probably the greatest slider ever thrown in baseball was thrown by Steve Carlton." So he talked about his usual answer was he'd grip it like this and throw what out of it. Well, about 5 minutes later, he came back and he talked about, and he said, "Well, when you get your elbow, the higher you get your elbow, the more downward break you get. The flatter your elbow, the flatter the break." And I mean, I put that in memory bank, and I used that the rest of my career. So the count dictated what I would do with my slider. If I'm throwing a slider, it would dictate if I got my elbow higher and when I wanted to go down more when I was behind in the count. When I was ahead in the count, I wanted a flatter slider that would run off the plate to try to get him to chase it. So that was something that I used the rest of my career. There were little things that he would say that veteran speaking to a young player that you pick up on. And I learned a lot of things from different players. Ron Reed, who I played with my whole entire time in Philadelphia, he took me under his wing and showed me the ropes. The first thing I had to learn to do was warm up properly in the bullpen to get ready to go in a game, so I didn't leave everything in the bullpen. And by the time I got in the game, I was out of gas. And they said, you take your time once you're loose. Now slow down and throw pitch for pitch with the pitcher, so you don't leave it down here and you're still ready to go. There were little things that I had to learn making the transition from a starting pitcher to a relief pitcher. And then the second thing was how to use my stuff. So I would get things from people, this is what I do to a certain hitter, this is what I do, and so I kept those things in the back of my mind, and I could try them if I got in a situation where the game wasn't on the line. I could try them and see how they worked.
You're listening to Warren Brewster here on a special edition of ATL Prime Sports. It's was supposed to be Major League Baseball's opening day today, so we're taking you back in time for the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies World Series championship season. We're going to stay on the air a little bit longer than we thought, which is good news. Warren, thank you so much for staying with us. Let's talk about Pete Rose, Larry Bowa, and Mike Schmidt. I bet you've got stories you can't tell me on the air.
Yeah. What my favorite Pete Rose story was when he was still playing for the Phillies, and I was playing for the Cubs. He had a 44-game hitting streak in 1978, and Gene Barber got him out with a changeup. Well, by the 83 season, I'd learned the changeup, and I got 2 strikes on Pete one day, and I threw him a changeup, and the ball started on the outside part of the plate. He's hitting left-handed, and it starts on the outside part of the plate, cuts across the plate, and almost hit him in the shin, and the umpire called strike 3, and I got the ball back. I was laughing on him. Man, that ball wasn't even close to being a strike. So the next day, I'm out running around the field, and Pete flips me off. And he says, "What the hell was that?" And I go, "Change up, Pete, and you'll never see another one," as I ran. And he was a great teammate. I loved playing with Pete. He was so intense. When he was hitting, if he made an out, he'd flip his helmet to the bat boy, and he'd just sit himself down right on the top step of the dugout, and he'd go, "Whoa, look, shortstop just moved over 2 steps. This is what's coming. The center fielder shaded the other way. This is what's coming." I mean, he just knew every little thing about the game. Nothing ever got by him. He was as intense a player and played the game as hard as anybody has ever played the game. And it's just, he was an idol of mine from when I was a little boy. It was what a great opportunity to play with one of the greatest all-time players that ever played the game. And then Larry Bowa, you can't say enough about Larry. He stirred the pot in the clubhouse. He always kept everybody going and everybody on edge, and he was very fiery and just said what he thought every moment of the day. And he'd really get guys upset, but it got your adrenaline pumping and made you play that much harder just by getting upset with him. And then Mike Schmidt, I can't say much how much Mike Schmidt, what a great player he was. I was very fortunate in my career to play with all these great players. And he would hit a home run, and I would just be unbelievable. He hardly even swung at that ball. He just had such a good top hand, and he'd hit the ball, get good backspin on it, but he played pepper with the left center field tarp over the left field fence. It was just amazing how well he hit the ball and what a great hitter he was, what a great player he was. And then the one thing when I first got to the big leagues, what I tell people is all these guys were such great hitters, but as good as they were hitters, they were that good defensively. I pitched 4 years into my big league career before I gave up another run. I had Bowa at short and Smitty at third, and the ball never got through him. I mean, the ball had to be just absolutely scalded for it to get through that side of the infield. And I was a ground ball pitcher. I would imagine, I would say probably 60 to 75% of the outs that I got in my career were ground balls. That was my job, was to come in and with people on base and get a ground ball, get a double play, and get out of jams. That was I knew when the phone rang, it was for me when we were in those situations. I was the middle of an inning guy to come in and get a ground ball. And a story, my rookie year in spring training, we're playing the Cardinals in spring training, and Lou Brock's on first base, and it's a bunt situation. And Schmitty comes to the mound and says, "So I'm letting him bunt the ball and get out of the way." Okay. I throw the ball, I bunt it, and it's almost to the mound. And he comes out of nowhere, picks it up barehanded, makes a 270-degree spin back to second base and throws Brock out before he goes into a slide. So I said, I'll never have to touch a bunt for the rest of my career. I'm just, as long as he's there, I don't have to worry about anybody ever bunting the ball. I mean, it's just what a phenomenal play. And this is spring training. And so that was the things that I went through in my career with the defense we had was just phenomenal. So it made my job a lot easier than it could have ever been.
Well, you're listening to Warren Brewster here on ATL Prime Sports. Special edition of Major League Baseball opening day. Major League Baseball does not have opening day, so due to the coronavirus outbreak, so we're going back in time to 1980 with Philadelphia Phillies World Series champion Warren Brewster. Warren, I mentioned earlier you played with Bob Boone. Was his sons Brett or Aaron in the clubhouse, and did Aaron know the word savages back then?
Yeah, they were always around the clubhouse. Yeah, in fact, we had one point where there were so many kids on the field. Everybody's kid, Pete Rose Jr., Jim Cott's son, the Boone brothers. There were more players, more kids on the field than there were players. And finally, it came a day where they finally had management say, okay, the kids have to stay off the field. But the greatest thing about Aaron Boone was he would mimic everybody's batting stances like he did when he did the Sunday night baseball games. They had boondoggle, and he would do a guy's batting stance. He used to do, I can remember vividly, we played one night game a year in spring training in Detroit over in Lakeland. And he went that night, and about 20 minutes, 15 minutes before game time, he went up with a bat to home plate and started going. He was about 5 years old at the time. And he went through, Richie Hebner was his idol. He loved Richie. And he went through Richie Hebner's swing, how he tugged on the back of his jersey and went through mimicked his whole swing. And the fans just went nuts. I mean, as a player, I sat there and watched him. It was amazing, the things that he could do. And there's this little 5-year-old bat that was as big as he was, going through everybody's batting stance. It was quite a sight to see.
I tell you what, Warren, you had a really good season in 1980. Your ERA was under 4. It was about 3.7 something. Ended up a 500 record, 2-2 overall. You pitched in a bunch of games. Of course, relievers back then, didn't pitch as many games as they do today. What did you do to keep yourself ready, since you did have less appearances than a typical reliever back then?
Right. Well, what I did was I ran a lot. I would run a couple miles every day, stretch, and just make sure that I was ready to go. I did my exercises, arm exercises, shoulder exercises, kept everything loose, strengthened my legs every day, stayed in physical shape, so I was ready to pitch. Back in those days, you had a lot of times where you pitch 2 or 3 innings at a time. It wasn't a 1 inning and done deal. And we, in 1977, had a 4-man bullpen. And we increased by 1 in 1978 in the middle of the season. We added another reliever. We added Raleigh Eastwood. So you were used to pitching every day or 2 or 3 or 4 days in a row. It was no big deal. You got, and that's the way my arm was. I could throw every day. I didn't have any problem with that. I never had a day where I'm too sore, I can't pitch. I was ready. I came to the ballpark every day ready to pitch. And it's a mindset. And now with the way guys throw today, it's a lot different when they're throwing 95 to 100 miles an hour. It takes a little more toll on your arm. And what I see with the way they teach pitching today, they're not using the legs like they used to. Right? The drop and drive from years back is gone and out of the game. It's a stay tall and fall type of delivery that guys are using today, and it takes a little more strain on. It puts more strain on your arm. You've got to use your legs, and that's why for me, running was so important. I had to keep my legs in shape and stay strong and continue to gain strength with my legs more than I did my upper body. And you can, like I said before, I came to the ballpark ready to pitch every day. It didn't matter if I threw 3 innings one day, I'm ready to go. At least get an out or two the next day. I'm ready to pitch.
Well, I tell you what, you had a heck of a season, and so did your 1980 Philadelphia Phillies. You ended up winning the division by 1 game. You went to extra innings in the NLCS, won that in exciting fashion, down 5-2 in the 7th inning, and won that. And then the World Series at up 2-0, tied it 2 apiece, beat the Kansas City Royals in 6 games. What a phenomenal season. Thank you for going back in time with us here on ATL Prime Sports, Warren. It was a pleasure to have you on. Good luck to you. Stay safe out there, and maybe we'll put on some of your former Phillies teammates on the show. I'd like to be able to get their perspective of your 1980 season also.
That sounds great, Todd. Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. It's great talking to you.
Well, thank you. And the pleasure was mine. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, that was Warren Brewster, 1980 World Series champion here on ATL Prime Sports, our Major League Baseball opening day special edition. And we went back in time with the great season that the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies had as they became world champions. For myself, for Breck in San Francisco, I want to thank everyone for listening. And I want everyone to have a pleasant evening and stay safe out there in this coronavirus world. Hopefully it'll go away and we'll be back to Major League Baseball and our normal daily lives very soon. God bless everyone. Good evening.